A lot of people who are English were born in what was then the British Empire. It was a very common thing at the time. It's not any longer. But many of my contemporaries at school were born in India. Many were born in Africa. I was born in Kenya. My family is a sort of outdoors family. My father and his two brothers and their father and their grandfather were all naturalists. They all lived outdoors. They all rather sort of spent their time in the open air. So when I grew up a rather bookish child who preferred to be indoors reading, it wasn't entirely in keeping with the family tradition. At the age of 7, I was sent to boarding school in what was then southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. It was a very, very new, very, very English prep school, full of English customs. It was actually a breakaway from a famous English prep school called the Dragon School, and they had the same traditions. The headmaster had been a housemaster at the Dragon School, and he took all the traditions, the school song, the school badge, the school motto, and the tradition that all the masters were called by their nicknames. So we called him Tank, even when he was beating us. I suppose I didn't really hit my stride intellectually until much, much later when I got to Oxford at the age of about 19 or 20. At school I was mostly a pretty mediocre student, and I would say that I scraped into Oxford. I wrote The Selfish Gene at the age of about, well, I began in my early 30s. But hitherto, I'd been a fairly ordinary lecturer in zoology, in animal behaviour at Oxford, and I was doing lab research. Then in about 1972, exasperated by the idea that had been put about by many popular books that natural selection is all about the good of the species, animals work for the good of the group or the good of the species, I felt a good idea to write a book about it. While I was writing The Selfish Gene, I spoke to various publishers about it and got some fairly enthusiastic responses to it from various publishers. One very senior British publisher, very experienced British publisher, suggested that a better title was The Immortal Gene. And in many ways he might have been right. I might have published it with him, but for the fact that an editor at Oxford University Press, Michael Rogers, got to hear of the book indirectly and asked to see it. And as I gave him the chapters that I'd already written, and then it was out of my hands. I mean, this was a really, really enthusiastic publisher, and it was no gainsaying him. He phoned me up and he said, "I've read your chapters, can't sleep. I must have that book." And I couldn't resist that sort of pressure. And so I went in with him and wrote the book with even more enthusiasm. The meaning of gene, which is in The Selfish Gene, is a sort of unit of selection. It happens to be DNA. But actually the facts of DNA are so utterly enthralling, and I've made use of them in some of my other scientific books. DNA, the whole story of molecular genetics, is a story of information technology. At bottom, biology is a branch of information technology. It's a branch of computer science. It works just like a computer. It's a quaternary computer, not a binary computer. But every one of your cells, and every one of every animal and every plant cells, contains a huge digital database, digital information, which has been passed down over countless generations. Natural selection always choosing, winnowing it out, carving it into shape to survive better in the environment of your ancestors. So if you happen to be a flying bird, your DNA could be said to contain a description of the aerial environment in which your ancestors survived. If you happen to be a mole, your DNA contains a description of what it's like to live underground, a description in the sense that your ancestors have survived for generations in a soft, moist, dark environment underground, and their genes have been naturally selected to help them to survive in that environment. We humans too bear genes, have a database in every one of our cells, which can be seen as a description of the world in which our ancestors survived. I think that's an utterly riveting thought. It's something that would have enchanted Darwin if he had known about it. I've long been fascinated by how lucky we are to be here. the chance luck of a particular sperm meeting a particular egg when you were conceived, and then the same thing when each of your parents was conceived, and then each of your grandparents was conceived, and so on. It almost doesn't bear thinking about. I mean, the luck of each one of us existing is far, far greater than the luck of winning a major lottery. It's uncountably lucky.